Welcome forward to day 20 of our reflections on St. Joseph, and the theme of day 20 is Joseph most obedient. I want you to think about that word obedient and what are your first responses to that word. And it would be fair to say that most people would say it's got negative connotations. So if you are obedient, in some respects you're having to follow rules and instructions, and maybe you're not too happy about that. So I want you to think about obedience and being obedient, and does being obedient take away your freedom? Because if you're having to follow rules, you haven't got the freedom to choose, or have you? And so I want you to think about that and think about why we have to follow certain rules. And the rules that I suppose we should be thinking about are the natural rules and the divine rules given to us by God. And they're the rules that really we should be thinking about, and especially in terms of Joseph being most obedient to them. So he was following God's natural and divine rules, and he was having to certainly use all his virtues in order to do so. So again, give that some thought before we move on. So another question: what is the purpose of obedience in this context then? So it's about doing God's will, but it's about trusting in God and doing his will. And we know that Joseph is the perfect model for that. So in other words, when he had his dreams, he would then listen to God and then do God's will. So he'd be listening and then he would do God's will. And that's what we're being asked to do. Yes, imitate Joseph, to do God's will, which means about serving God. But the purpose of that obedience and the purpose of doing God's will is to become what God intends you to be, serving God. And the striving for excellence comes in again, which is about striving for the virtues. So being obedient to God is about being what God intended you to be, but it's also about getting to the place where God wants you to ultimately be, which is at the wedding feast in heaven. So just think about how marvellous that is, and why we then should be following these natural and divine laws. And in order to follow them in today's society, we are going to need, obviously, the support of grace in terms of those virtues, but we're really going to have to act with temperance, courage, justice and prudence. And because a lot of the things that we really strongly believe in or should be defended, such as marriage and the protection of unborn children, is something that, to speak out about, you may well find yourself up against a lot of opposition. And so that's why it's very important that we do imitate Joseph in terms of his obedience to God, which is ultimately just about trusting God to help him get to where he should be and to be who God intended him to be. And we can do that again through sleep, believe it or not, and that's a discussion for another day, but we do that through pondering. And we know that Joseph would be listening to God in his sleep, but he'd be pondering over issues, he'd be praying over these issues, and then he would act. And that is what we're being called to do. And we're also being called in today's society, where we have this moral and spiritual famine, to actually give clarity to virtues and to gospel values. God bless. Until tomorrow.